All right, Nico, can you say, welcome to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies?
It's a happy episode. Happy babies.
Welcome back to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies. I'm Dr. Jay Warren. I'm the prenatal and pediatric chiropractor here at the Capilano Center. And this podcast is all about helping you have a proactively healthy pregnancy so you can have a safe, gentle, natural birth. And that's going to allow you to bring your baby into the world that much more gently and healthily so you can start off your family experience more powerfully than if it's full of stress and trauma and other health concerns. So if you are a fan of this show and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Wherever you listen to your podcast, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a upcoming episode. And also, if you haven't rated or reviewed the podcast and you've enjoyed it and gotten value of it, that will really help me out because that'll allow this podcast to reach more and more parents like yourself that might be missing out on this type of information and helping them along their parenting journey. So thank you in advance for that. And thank you if you already have rated and reviewed. On today's episode, I am so happy to bring you Amy Morin. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a psychotherapist, and also the author of 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do. And I love talking with authors on this podcast whose books have made a big impact on my life that either professionally or personally have made a huge difference. And this book, her book, is absolutely one of them. I picked it up a little while ago after hearing her on another podcast, and I've learned so much. I reached out to her, and she graciously agreed to be here so she can share her wisdom and the wisdom of this book to you as parents, because the themes that she goes through in this book are all about how to empower our kids to be more resilient, to be have a healthy self-esteem, to have self-control, self-discipline, and all these emotional skills that we as parents, at least me as a parent, want to give our kids so they can go out in the world and just make big impacts and know that they're safe and secure and they're going to be able to handle what comes their way. Because as parents, we want to shelter them from that, but that's just not realistic. And so the more we can teach them before they go out into the world without us by their sides, the better they're going to be able to do. And I know you as a listener, if you're listening to this, you want that as well for your kiddo, and Amy's going to be able to share a lot of that information today. So before I jump into our interview, let me give you some background on her, introduce you to her, and then we can get to that. So Amy Morin is a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and an instructor at Northeastern University. She's a columnist for Forbes, Inc. and Psychology Today, and she's also a therapeutic foster parent. In 2013, her article, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, became a viral sensation when it was read over 50 million times. Her TEDx talk, The Secret to Being Mentally Strong, has been seen over 5 million times. And now her follow-up book, The 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do, she focuses on teaching parents on how to raise mentally strong and resilient children in an ever-changing world. She's been featured on major media outlets including Parenting, Time, Fox News, CNN, and Oprah.com, and I'm so happy to have her on the Healthy Births, Happy Babies podcast. So let me switch now over to my conversation with Amy Morin. All right, Amy, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you because I know I'm going to learn so much as a parent. And it was as a parent that I first found out about you. And I'm just happy that, one, you've read this book, or you wrote this book. I'm learning so much from it, and I know my listeners will be able to as well. It was actually through James Altucher's podcast episode, an interview you did with him, that I first learned about it. And then your TEDx talk's been seen over 5 million times. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And I remember the morning I was going into James's podcast and looked at the title of your interview, which is 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, which is your original. And I think it was that first morning I was coming off from like a bad preschool drop off, or, my son was like battling with the puppy or something, and I was feeling not mentally strong coming out of it. And I remember as I was pressing to play, I was thinking, all right, how am I going to apply this as a parent? And then I don't know if it was at the very beginning of your interview or it was towards the end where you said that you'd written this book that we're going to talk about 13 things mentally strong parents don't do. So we can go, instead of extrapolating, we can jump right into that.
Okay, sounds good.
Good. So, is some of your backstory, I mean, you're a psychotherapist, and you're dealing with parents and people dealing with stresses and really resiliency, or trying to have a person be more resilient. And you also came through a lot of tragedy. Within a couple of years, you lost your mom suddenly and then your husband suddenly. And it was really that experience that you were able to assimilate a lot of this, the 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And then now you've written this about parents. How did you get the segue of writing that first book about just in general for mentally strong people and then coming into the parenthood world?
Well, when I wrote my first book, I had written an article that went viral. 50 million people read the article, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And what most people didn't know when they read the article was that that was a letter to myself. And I sort of only published it online on a whim, thinking if this is helpful to me, maybe it would be helpful to somebody else. And then that led to the first book. And then when readers of my first book, I just kept getting the same question over and over again, where people kept saying, this is great. How do I teach my children how to be mentally strong?
Yes.
And so then I knew, okay, I need to figure that out. How do I make this shift for kids? And I could have written a kid's book about mental strength, but I knew that probably wouldn't be the most effective way to do it. Kids could read something and then how do they apply it? Well, they need a parent to be involved and say, okay, this is one of those teachable moments, or how can I coach you right now? So I wanted to write a book that would help parents become a mental strength coach. And fortunately, my publisher was on board from the beginning, and we said, let's write this book about what mentally strong parents don't do, so that we can teach parents skills for themselves about, what do you do when you're having a rough day, or when your child's misbehaving, or how can you stay mentally strong when you're going through tough times? And then how can you specifically teach those skills to kids? What are the exercises that will work for a child, whether you have a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old? I wanted to make sure that I gave parents really tangible exercises so that they could say, okay, let's flip to page 72 and let's try that one exercise right now and see how it works. Because I was finding so many parents in my therapy office too who would say, well, I don't know how to teach my child about feelings because nobody taught me, or I really want my child to learn how to control his temper, but I don't know how to teach him. I don't know how I do it myself. I can't really put it into words. So I wanted to take all those things that I'd learned in my therapy office and working with parents and figure out, how do I put it into a book that will give parents sort of this step-by-step guide.
Right, and you've done an excellent job of that. I will say, in that, like, I am the father of a preschooler, and in each of the chapters, in each of the 13 things, you have a section about how to teach a preschooler, and then you have a school-age kid, and then also examples for teenagers. So I personally am so happy of finding this book because I can read it and help my preschooler, but then I know it's going to be something that as my kiddo grows up and we evolve as a family, I'll be able to use those tools as well. So it isn't just you have great stories along the lines as well to make it really applicable to, or just put ourselves in a moment of how did those parents handle it, and then what might I do for my child. So it isn't just a ideas book. There's a lot of practicality that I'm sure came from your practice working with parents.
Yeah, it did. A lot of it was exactly what the questions parents would come in with into my therapy office, or the problems they were dealing with. And then I became a foster parent, and it was interesting to me too to make that shift of just talking and problem solving with other parents to then employing it in my own life as a foster parent. And knowing it and doing it are two very different things. So I knew that too, for me, the mistakes I made and the problems I experienced, and even though I knew I had the head knowledge, but to physically do it or to manage it when you're in the midst of it, it's harder to see the problem clearly, as opposed to when you're talking to somebody else about it. So that really taught me a lot about, okay, if I'm dealing with this in my own life, probably other parents are too.
Yeah, we all are. We're all in the trenches there. And I love the examples or the concept you use about like building, mental muscle, one in the kids, but then also in us. And it just gives us kind of a softness, or can bring that to ourselves as, okay, like we're getting better, we're getting stronger. I didn't do this morning perfect, but at least outside of the morning in the same day, I can reflect and do things better, possibly the next time, rather than it being something, well, screw the first kid up. Like, hopefully I'll do better on the second one and have
Right.
more in the trenches knowledge.
Yeah, and that, we all possess mental strength to a degree, and we certainly all have room for improvement. And just like you could keep working out your physical muscles by going to the gym, you can do the same when it comes to mental strength. You can keep working and working, and we all have bad days, bad weeks, even bad years, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean that you have to give up altogether. You can just keep growing from there, and it's all about the choices that you make every day and the good habits that you have, as well as giving up those bad habits that keep you stuck.
Right, and your checklist that you have in each chapter, I found really helpful in that once you're introducing one of the things, you'll have a checklist like, you as a person, do you do these things, yes or no? And then as a parent to your child, do you do those things? And I found those really, really helpful.
Good. I find a lot of people will say, well, I'm not a perfectionist in my personal life, but I am in my professional life. Or when it comes to most areas in my life, I don't feel guilty, but as a parent, I feel guilty all the time. So I just wanted to help people identify, okay, what are the areas in your life, or do you do some of these things? Because often parents will say, well, no, that one's not a problem for me. But then when we really go through it, they say, oh yeah, I do some of those things. And so I was hoping that would be enlightening to people, just to recognize some of the habits or things that we just get so used to sometimes that we don't even realize that we're doing them.
Right. Well, it's funny that you bring up the perfection one, because in that chapter, I checked off all of the ones in my personal and business life. That's definitely something I've been challenged with, like being perfect all the time. But interestingly, and thankfully, I guess, I don't do that with my son much. And I don't know if it's because that weight that I've borne, as far as always striving for perfection and beating myself up. I'm not wanting to do that for my kid. But I found that interesting that I don't do that as a parent.
Yeah, that is, because I find other parents who are the other way around, where they say, I can let my house be messy. I can, not get a report done on time, and I'm okay with that. But if my kid were to miss his homework assignment, I would freak out, because I want him to do better than I did, or I want him to achieve things that I wasn't able to achieve. And I think I just always find that interesting when parents find that in their parenting life they're one way, but in their other life the other way. And we all do that in different domains. But I was hoping that my checklist would just help raise some awareness about that.
Yeah, I know it did for me. Do you find that, like, with the differences in our own lives versus our parenting lives, coming from kind of like projecting onto our kids, like what either we feel we wanted to be and we want our kids to do, or we know how we turned out, so we're struggling so hard to not have it, and we're kind of blind to that?
Yeah, that's it exactly. So for the way that we grew up really impacted us and our core beliefs. And so even the people who say, I'm going to be nothing like my parents, end up creating something that sometimes is more like their parents than they want to admit. Or for people who say, I could have been, whether it's an NFL player, or I could have been a doctor, but wasn't given the opportunity, that sometimes they live vicariously through their kids. And interestingly, the research will show that doing that is actually quite healing for the parents. However,
Living
we know it's also
does?
Yeah, it
Really?
gives parents sort of this second chance in life to say, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it well, and I'm going to support my child. But on the flip side, we know that same thing is really detrimental to the kids. But it's hard for parents to realize that sometimes, whether you have a dad who's pushing their kids into sports, or you have a mom who's really pushing their kids in school because she didn't have a chance to go to college. For her or that dad, that can be really helpful. It's like, okay, I'm finally making things right again. But for the kids, being pushed like that, or having a parent who's making you do something you don't want to do, can cause lots of psychological problems later in life.
Right. And so you're saying, like, in a blind sense, like, just do like parenting opposite the way that you were raised, it can have a lot of detriment because, again, it's blind.
Right, right.
Okay.
And for parents who don't realize that just because you do the opposite doesn't make it better. If you had a I work with a lot of parents who will say, well, my parents yelled all the time, so I'm never going to raise my voice to my kids. But then they become overly permissive and instead of
Right.
taking control of the situation. So I run into that a lot where people say, if my parents didn't raise me in a way that I want to raise my kids, so I'll do the opposite. But there's usually a whole spectrum in between one end or the other, and you don't have to go to the other extreme to necessarily be a good parent.
Right. And that segues well into what I wanted to talk about as far as like power struggles. I mean, I've seen generationally, I think a generation ago, and me being part of it, was raised more strict, more my way or the highway. And we came out of that experience now as parents, sometimes want to do the opposite, exactly as you said, being more permissive. And then what you talked about in your number 5, like giving their children power over them. Like the power struggles are what I deal with all the time with, well, one, myself, of course, I'm a parent, but also with in my office, a lot of parents are like, oh my gosh, my kid is just running amok. And like, you know, it's kind of like the inmates are ruling the asylum type of thing. And it's coming from a place of not wanting to step in the authority. And I know I'm challenged by that. What are the main things that you find being the tools that a parent can start doing if they find that they're a lot of their time at home is dealing with like power struggles with their kiddos?
Well, I think to recognize the difference between giving your child too much power and empowering your child. So I work with a lot of parents who will say, I asked my child, what do you want to do on Saturday? And then the whole family does whatever he suggests. Well, that's okay to do once in a while as a treat. You don't want your child dictating the whole family's schedule all the time. That's not good for kids. Or when kids get to pick what the whole family's going to eat for dinner every night, and the mom will say, well, he won't eat anything other than macaroni and cheese, so that's what we eat every day. And those types of things are giving kids too much power. Or when I work with parents who will let kids weigh in on major family decisions. So if the family's thinking of moving across the country, they'll ask the kids, what do you think about that? And if the kid says no, the family doesn't move. And when I work with parents, a lot of it is about explaining to them, that's great that you value your child's opinion and that you're showing your child that you really value their opinion. But you don't want to allow your child's opinion to dictate what your family does, because kids don't actually have the skills that they need to lead. Parents do. There's a reason we don't let kids vote. We don't let them make major life decisions. They don't have the knowledge and the wisdom. And when we give them too much power, it actually gives them more anxiety, because then they think, well, mom or dad isn't a fearless leader who can make good decisions. And instead they're really taking my opinion into account, which must mean they don't know what they're doing. So I work with tons of kids with anxiety who come in and say, it's no wonder that this kid is acting out, because he's saying, you can't control me. Look, when I run up and kick you in the shins, you don't do anything about it. And so for parents to know that it's a healthy thing to take charge and to take that back. And that doesn't mean you need to rule with an iron fist, or that you need to say it's my way or the highway all the time. You can you can show respect and say, yes, I value your opinion, but I also make healthy choices based on what I've learned as a grown-up.
Right. And you make that distinction that, kids aren't miniature adults, although we want them to be, right?
Right.
And how they're just brain isn't really developed enough to make those kind of choices. And I think what you were saying is like when they are being not only involved, but like really in charge of those decisions, like it can feel like chaotic to them. And in the chaos sense, in that unsafe space, they act out.
Right, that's it exactly. And for kids need rules, and they need parents to say, this is the structure, this is how things are going to happen. And if you don't like it, sometimes that's okay. You're not going to like everything. But to look at really the long term, when your child is an adult and has a boss someday, the boss probably isn't going to ask questions like, do you feel like coming in today? Oh, you don't want to come to work? That's okay. You don't have to. So you really want to be teaching life skills. Sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do. And for parents to just really try to establish a clear hierarchy that says, we're in charge and we value your opinion, but overall you have to earn your privileges and you have to ask for permission before you do certain things. And we may ask you for your opinion, but you don't get an equal vote on major family decisions or adult conversations, that you don't get to weigh in on them because you're a child.
Right. And how would you word that to a child? Assuming they're old enough to, like, one, be asked and chime in, but then also, not dismiss them as like, well, you're just like a kid. And I know that's not what you're saying, but to say, okay, like, well, we're going to ask you because you're part of the family, but when it comes down to it, mom and dad are making the decision. How do you still, like, empower them of that they're part of things, but also as you said, like, understanding the hierarchy?
I think it's about sitting down and saying, your mother and I are trying to make this decision, and we want to make sure that we've looked at all the different options and angles, and we really want to know, how do you feel about this? At the end of the conversation, you can say, great, thank you for sharing that with me. We'll take that into consideration when we decide what we're going to do. So for kids to know, okay, you care that I'm really angry that I would have to move schools, or you really value the fact that this is going to be upsetting to me. But on the other side, you guys know what's best for us. And even if it's going to make me uncomfortable, I trust that it's still the best choice. And I think that's a really key message for kids to get.
Right. That they have power, but as you said, limited power, not all of it.
Right. Because you don't want to raise a child who thinks, that mom and dad are the king and queen and you have to do everything they say at all times. But for kids to know, even over little things, you can give them choices. So it might be, do you want to clean your bedroom now, or do you want to clean your bedroom when your TV show is over? That at least gives kids a little bit of a say over just small things. Or do you want to drink water, or do you want to drink ice water for dinner? And that gives kids an option. They can speak up and say, this is what I want. But then on the other hand, you don't want to give them choices over big things. Should we move to a new house? Or I've worked with divorced mothers who will ask their child, do you think it's okay if I date? And those aren't decisions that kids should be weighing in on. They may be able to give you their opinion or express their fears, that kind of stuff, but it shouldn't be up to them.
Right. And too many choices. As a parent of a preschooler, I had to really rein that in. Instead of saying, like, what do you want to eat? Meaning whatever's in the fridge, whatever's in the house, to, do you want to eat a turkey sandwich, or do you want to have a cheese sandwich, or whatever it might be? And also mentally strong, like trying to come up with, like, all right, what are the two choices that, if whatever he chooses, are going to be something that I want him to do?
Yes, and I think that is key, knowing you can live with either choice, and then letting your child make the choice over those little things that in the end don't really matter. But that really empowers kids to say, okay, I do have some decisions in life about what happens to me, where I go, what I eat. And I think then they feel empowered, but they don't feel like, and they know that mom or dad are still in control, and that they don't have to keep getting into those power struggles as much. And granted, all kids and parents get into power struggles sometimes. And that's really an opportunity as a parent to say, I'm in charge and you aren't going to control what we do or how I feel or how I behave. If you get upset and are throwing a tantrum, it doesn't mean that I'm going to blow up at you. Instead, I'm going to try to stay calm. I'm going to take steps to remedy the situation. And my job is to control my emotions and not necessarily control you. And as a kid, your job is to control yourself and not try to control other people.
Right. And I think that's something, I mean, as far as you said, it's just over the whole reason of the book is like trying to have empowered kids become resilient adults. We want our kids to have like healthy self-esteem, like wanting to go out in the world to be contributors and be able to handle the stresses that come their way. As parents, I know that there's that tendency wanting to shelter them from everything. And it comes from a place of love because like we don't want them to hurt or anything. But then thinking of the big picture, just as you said about like boss is going to ask whether or not you want to come into work or not, like there's going to be things that happen and we want them to have the tools to be able to handle situations, to be able to like take responsibility and deal with the consequences. That was number 7, letting your child avoid responsibility is something that a mentally parent shouldn't do. And that allows them to bounce back better. And I'd like to talk with you about that bounce back factor.
Yeah, I think as a parent, it's natural and it's normal to say, I want to give my kid an easy childhood, right? That we just want to spare them from pain. We want to make life easy. And you think, you're over there playing with your blocks and your Legos. I don't want you to have to do chores because especially I can do it in 5 minutes. When I try to get you to do it, it's going to take an hour. So it's normal to say, just be a kid, go have fun. But on the other hand, when we do that, kids grow up and they're not emotionally ready for lots of things in life, especially how do you deal with pain? How do you deal with setbacks? And what happens when you get rejected? And we're seeing the consequences of that now when kids get to college. 60% of them say, all the adults in my life focused on academics, but they didn't focus on teaching me how to be emotionally ready for the challenges of life after high school. 60% of the kids say that they wish they would have been taught more emotional skills. So I think when you give kids responsibility, when you let them deal with some pain, those are all opportunities to teach them. And the more that you do that, the better prepared they'll be for life after they leave the nest.
Right. And I mean, there's so many, stresses that happen in life and failures that we'll go through, and the failures can be opportunities to like grow beyond. But I think a criticism of the current generation of the kiddos coming up is that they're not able to handle like rejection or even the potential of failing something, so they're not trying. And I think that's what you're speaking to in that kind of like emotional sense. They might know how to do the project, but if they're afraid of possibly failing, that's an emotional IQ or an emotional skill and strength that they might not have, that I know I want for my kiddo going into the world.
Yeah, I teach college classes, so I get to see it on that end of the spectrum, that I'll have I had a student email me and say, well, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I know that my project is due by midnight, but I like to check it over 100 times. And so it's not going to be due. I'm not going to have it done today. And she fully expected that I was going to say, great, no problem. You can pass it in whenever you want. And I said, no, it's due at midnight. You'll have to pass in whatever you have done. And she was really disturbed by that. She just had no idea, okay, how do I do that? And if I'm not satisfied with it, can I really press the send button? And I had another kid who emailed me and said, that test that you gave us was really hard. And I said, well, yes, it was supposed to be hard. Right. And the student was really upset that I would give a test knowing that it was going to be a challenge. And so it's interesting to me now to see college students and see how they deal with challenges, how they deal with difficult things, and some of the struggles that they have, I think, go back to the things that they learned as a kid or the skills they didn't gain when they were younger, to know that that's okay, and it's okay to do tough things, and it's okay to try your best. And if it's not perfect, that's okay too.
Right. So like going back to that second question that the kid was asking about, like, oh, that test was really hard. Were they almost implying like you shouldn't have done that and that it should have been made easier?
Yes. And that it was too tough. And to be honest, it was an open book test.
Really?
So the answers were there and it wasn't timed. So if you wanted to spend all day looking up the answers, you could do that. But the student really just was very upset that I would give a test that was challenging and thought I should change the test because of that.
And I think that's kind of goes along with the current generation being criticized as like entitled, and they feel like, oh, that you as my professor are here to give me an A. How are you going to give me an A rather than working for it? I don't necessarily buy into all of that, but obviously those are two examples where they're kind of wanting you to like change things around for their performance.
Right. And I don't remember in college thinking that was an option. It wouldn't have occurred to me.
It was never an option for me. No.
To email my professor and say that test was really too hard, or that I would have said, I'm not going to pass that in because I need to double check my answers. So it's going to be late and you'll accept it. Wouldn't have occurred to me in a million years. So I just find it interesting that, and I'm not that old, I promise, but that in the past, 20 years that I think this next generation, that they just have a different mindset when it comes to that stuff.
Right. And, as far as like upbringing and resiliency and the like is definitely part of it, not all of it. But I remember it was actually James Altucher's show as well. He was interviewing Seth Godin, and we were talking about education and the current state of things. And what he was saying was that he wants for kids to be to solve interesting problems and to be leaders. And those are things that are beyond academics. I mean, you have to have academics to solve problems, but there was that element of, it was like emotional resiliency that he wanted to teach kids younger, so that when they went into the world, they would solve interesting problems and lead people. And I definitely see a lack of that now. And as a parent and of a 4-year-old, like I want to give him those things much more than knowing his ABCs and the like.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we're seeing that is causing a problem is, we see a lot of helicopter parenting that
Mm.
evolved over the years. But when I was a kid, if somebody forgot their homework once in a while, it wasn't a big deal. Or if one of us forgot our soccer cleats for soccer practice, you just didn't get to play that day. But it wasn't the end of the world. But because everybody forgot their homework once in a while, or everybody forgot their soccer cleats sometimes. But now we're seeing parents will, drive 20 miles to drop off a forgotten homework assignment at school, or parents are doing their kids' homework for them. And because of that, like one missed homework assignment actually puts kids at a disadvantage. And so sort of normal parenting shifted to this, okay, I have to cater to my child. I have to make sure that my child is doing well at all times. And that sort of a competition made it so that kids are less likely to fail. Parents are correcting their kids' homework before they go to school so that they always get a 100, or parents are propping kids up and giving them tutors and lots of expensive SAT prep courses and stuff like that, just to make sure that they always excel and that they succeed. So then once they get out of their parents' house, they're just not sure how to deal with rejection and failure and challenges that are really tough.
Right. And having, a parent to come and like fix things with the boss, or if they're starting a business, there's just so many challenges there that you need to be resilient for.
Right. And I talk a little bit about it in the book, but the number of HR people who are now seeing parents attend their kids' job interviews with them.
No, I
These
didn't remember
college
that part. No way.
college graduates who are their parents are negotiating their adult children's salary, or that if there's a disciplinary action in the office place, HR people are hearing from parents,
That's so
which I find
interesting.
I find it fascinating that, again, like you would show up for a job interview with your mom or your dad at your side, or the number of job applications that companies are getting. And then when they go to call the person who they thought applied, the adult child is then saying, oh, did I apply there? Because their mom or dad filled out the application or sent in their resume without the child knowing.
Wow. Well, and that's another part I love about your book is that one, the stories is a snapshot, like a case study, you will, of a certain situation, but then you bring it back like to bigger picture so that you can, as a parent, look at like, okay, well, my kid's not having that problem, but this is the larger issue that trickling down into teen years might be an issue. And if we are going into this parenthood experience, wanting our kids to be strong and resilient and have the confidence to be able to go out in the world and handle things, to know that there's a safe space to come to as a parent. Obviously, we want that as well, but to have the confidence to be able to, that they can stand on their own 2 feet is thread all the way throughout your book. So I think that's really important. And talking about discipline, I want to touch on that one. Number 11 is confusing discipline with punishment. And that's something that I know all parents are challenged by, of like being, the authoritative dictator and my way or the highway, or using discipline as a healthy way of educating and teaching in that moment. And I would only imagine that all of the parents that you're dealing with are dealing with the same kind of things. But I think that also circles back to where we were at the beginning around, if we were raised with kind of a my way or the highway, we might cycle the opposite way and lose out on the opportunity to teach our kids in those moments.
Right. I see a wide spectrum. I see the free range parents who say, kids will be kids, just let them go out there and fall down and that'll be great. But then they're not giving their kids enough guidance so that when their kid does make a mistake, they're not there teaching to say, how do we learn from this? And so they have kids that are always getting into trouble, or kids who are just not able to learn from their mistakes because they're not getting the support that they need. And then I see the other end of the spectrum where parents are say, I don't care how you feel, this is the rule, follow it at all costs. And then they don't realize that they're not necessarily teaching their kids new skills. They're teaching their kids, say, to become a better liar. So the child just says, well, I just won't get caught,
Right.
rather than not do that, or I won't really learn how to do this better. I'm just going to learn how to make sure that you don't notice that I'm doing this, or whatever it is. But so sometimes the skills that we think we're teaching, we're not really teaching. So it's important to be involved enough to know, okay, when my child's upset, how do I teach him how to calm himself down so I'm not doing it for him? Or when my child gets in trouble at school, how do I problem solve and make it so that my child is involved and invested in not getting in trouble again? And so this chapter about discipline and punishment, it's one I've gotten a lot of feedback on. I didn't expect it to sort of catch on as much as it did. But this one I've gotten probably the most feedback on from parents who say, this is great, or I didn't realize I was doing these things, because they want to become more of a disciplinarian who's teaching their child self-discipline as opposed to just saying you messed up and now you must suffer for it.
Right. And again, going through that experience as a kid, I think what you talk about this a lot, about like teaching them self-control rather than us controlling them, is such an important life skill. That discipline, and in those moments, allows them to experience.
Yes, and it's hard to do. I mean, you're in the middle of the grocery store and your child's screaming. You just want your child to stop screaming.
Oh.
Or, when your child's misbehaving in public especially. And I think social media plays into this too, where we just want to look like good parents, or we want people to know that our kids are happy generally, and that this little snapshot you might see of this child throwing a fit doesn't represent the whole picture. And I think that just leads to parents sometimes saying, I'm going to bribe my kid. Here's a lollipop. Now be good while we're in the store. Or parents go to great lengths to do whatever they can to make it so that they feel like other people aren't judging them. Because I think we live in a world where parents do get judged, and shaming is a real problem these days.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a perfect example as far as like the perfectionist parent or part of me, like, oh, God forbid, like Nico should do something in public. I've gotten much better at that. And I remember before I was a parent, I was always empathetic when I saw a parent or a kid like freaking out in the grocery store. But there was a part of me that, did judge the parent. I wouldn't do it to them, like to their face, but I was like, oh, it's not that big a deal, is what I was saying, right? As a parent now, I empathize in a totally different way, because, there's no sense crying over spilled milk, but it might have been the 17th time the milk was spilled that day. And of course, your circuits are fried and like you might lose it, So I do think, more and more parents, like as we've all been through that, we can empathize differently, but there is a thing of like, well, I'm the only one that's ever gone through this, and it's just not true. We're all in this together. We're not alone.
Right. And as a therapist, I teach parenting classes, and I'd be with a foster child in the grocery store, and one of my clients would walk by me, and my foster child's throwing a fit, and the parent's just looking at me smiling like, glad to know this happens to you too.
Right. Well, you're a real person as well, dealing with us common folk problems, right?
That's right. I don't have any magic wands either to make kids behave at all times, and to figure out, okay, how do I make this a learning experience for my child? And then what can I learn from it too as a parent? I think those are important questions to ask.
Yeah. Well, you might not have any magic wands, but you do have amazing tools, amazing resources in this book, Amy. So I would love for you to tell our listeners like how they can get it and learn more about your work.
On my website is the best place to go, which is Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed clinical social worker.com. And we have lots of information about both my books. There's articles and resources and information about a mental strength course that I do. And you can find links to my social media accounts there as well.
Okay, great. And I'll make sure all those links are there for you. So the listeners can just click right onto it. Your TED Talk is amazing. I highly recommend looking at that. Obviously, the book, I'm a big fan of. I have highlights and underlines all over the place, dog-eared. So one, as a parent, but two, obviously preparing to talk with you. So Amy, thank you so much for being here. And in our last moment, what's the major take-home you'd like a parent listening to this today to take from what you shared?
I would say to view your role as a parent as a guide rather than a protector, and to know that when you go through tough times and challenges that you can guide your child into turning it into a learning experience, but to let your child face those tough things in life head on sometimes.
That's beautiful. And what about for the little kiddo that might be listening? Like maybe mom's still pregnant and a great parent already, like learning these things before baby's in here, or maybe the kiddo is here. What little words of wisdom would you like to whisper into their ear?
I would say that life is tough, but that you're tougher, and that your parents are doing the best job that they can, and that on the days when you don't believe in yourself, your mom and dad will believe in you and teach you that you're stronger than you think.
That's beautiful too. Well, Amy, thank you again for being here. I want to thank you as a parent just for the work that you've done and putting it into this book. So it's helping me and my son and my family. So I thank you for that. But I also thank you for being here to share your message so it can reach out to lots more parents.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Hi, it's Dr. J again, and I want to thank you so much for listening to the podcast. It's something I really enjoy doing, and I, as a parent, learn a ton from these experts coming on and sharing their wisdom, so I hope you're getting a lot out of it too. And I want to share something else with you. I've created a guide called the 40 Ways to Connect with Your Baby During Pregnancy. It's full of simple things you can do on a day-to-day basis that will help strengthen that bond that you have with your baby. It's a free download. You can go to my website at drjwarren.com/40ways and just enter your email. I'll send it right to you. You can download it and start working on it right away. All of the research that I'm learning in the fields of epigenetics and attachment parenting is showing that the more bonded you are during your pregnancy with your baby, the better the birth is going to go and the better parenting is going to go because you have that strong foundation, a strong connection to build upon. So go again to my website. It's drjwarren.com/40ways and get that free guide. And again, thanks for listening.